They thought they ended you, broke you, silenced you. They walked away from the damage they caused with the confidence of someone who believed they'd never look back. But time has a way of unmasking truth, and here they are, returning to the ruins they created, pretending they forgot who set the fire. Why do they come back, after the betrayal, after the manipulation, after tearing apart everything sacred? It's not love, it's not regret. It's the echo of their own emptiness calling them back to the one place they once held power, you. But what they left behind isn't what they're returning to. They expect the same fragile soul, but what greets them now is someone unrecognizable, someone they no longer have the strength to break. The fire they started still burns, but not for them they returned, slowly, carefully, as if walking through the remains of a fire they once lit. Because that's exactly what it is. They thought they burned you to the ground, thought they had watched your spirit flicker and fade. They assumed their eggs it would be the final blow, and the silence that followed was your collapse. But what they failed to understand is this. Some souls aren't destroyed in fire, they are forged by it. And now, they stand at the edge of the ruins they created, confused by what still stands. They don't recognize the person rising from the ashes, because it's not the version of you they once knew, it's the version their cruelty awakened. They didn't expect you to rebuild. They didn't expect you to become untouchable. They only came back to inspect the wreckage, hoping to find proof that you stayed broken. But instead they find something far more threatening: resilience, confidence, quiet power. You see, people like this don't return because they care. They return because they want to see if they still hold any control. They come back to the crime scene, not because they regret the damage, but because they want to study the aftermath. They want to see if you still bleed when they speak. They want to see if their shadow still lingers over your peace. But this time, you don't flinch, you don't shake, you don't bend to their presence. And that rattles them more than any confrontation ever could. What they started was meant to end you, but it ended them, the version of them that had power over you. Now they can't touch you. They can't read you. They can't break through the fireproof armor built from every scar they left behind. And so they stand there, stunned, pretending they came to make peace, pretending they returned with a softened heart, but deep down, even they know the truth. They are the architects of their own distance. They don't get to ask why the doors are locked. They welded them shut. They don't get to mourn what they once had, they buried it themselves. And now, what burns inside you isn't pain anymore, it's clarity. A controlled flame that no longer needs to consume you to keep you warm. The fire they started still burns, but not for them. It burns for you now, to guide your steps, to light your path, to remind you of who you became the moment you walked out of the flames and never looked back. Your silence became their loudest punishment. You said nothing. You didn't defend yourself when they twisted your name. You didn't explain your side to people who were already committed to misunderstanding you. You didn't scream. You didn't chase. You didn't beg them to see your worth. You chose silence not because you were weak, but because you were finished. And now, that silence has become the one thing they can't escape. It follows them, louder than any words you could have spoken. Because when you said nothing, they were forced to hear themselves, and that echo haunts them more than any confrontation ever could. You see, silence is a mirror. And when people are left alone with the reflection of what they've done, the truth becomes deafening. They expected retaliation. They were ready for chaos. But what they weren't ready for was your stillness, your refusal to be baited, your refusal to collapse into the storm they left behind. They thought walking away would leave you shattered. But when you didn't chase them, when you didn't fall apart, something inside them began to. That's why they came back. Not because they suddenly saw your value, but because they couldn't handle the quiet accountability you placed in their hands. You didn't try to win them back. You didn't try to rewrite the ending. You let the silence speak the truth, and it screamed louder than your pain ever could. They remember the last time they saw you broken, maybe, hurt definitely, but what they weren't ready for was the version of you that healed in silence, that found peace in distance, that stopped looking for closure in the mouths of people who never spoke the truth. And now they return, wrapped in false concern, asking how you've been, pretending to care. But you can see it in their eyes, the discomfort, the realization, the sting of your calm, because people who once had power over your emotions cannot understand how they lost it. They come back not because they miss your presence, but because they miss their control over it. But you're no longer a character in their story. You rewrote your narrative without needing their permission. And your silence, your decision to heal without an audience, stripped them of their favorite weapon, attention. Now they're left shouting into a void that no longer echoes. Your silence became your power. And that power became their punishment, so let them wonder. Let them wrestle with the questions they were never brave enough to answer. Let your silence ring in their memory like a bell they can't unhear. Because sometimes the loudest justice is no justice at all. Sometimes walking away with dignity echoes louder than revenge. And that echo your silence is the sound they'll never forget. Guilt always comes dressed as concern. They come back slowly, gently, with soft words and softer eyes, asking how you've been, if you're okay, if you've moved on. But listen closely. That isn't care speaking. That's guilt, carefully dressed in the costume of concern. They want you to believe they've changed. They want you to see their return as a sign of growth, of healing, of a heart that finally understands. But no, this is not redemption. This is performance. This is guilt looking for a place to be absolved, and they hope that place is still you. You see, people who have done damage rarely want to sit alone with the truth of their own choices. They look for shortcuts, for the quick fix, for someone else to cleanse the stain they themselves created, and often they return to the one they hurt not to offer healing, but to take relief. They want to see that you're okay, not because they care deeply, but because it makes them feel less cruel. Your survival becomes their justification. If you seem fine, then maybe what they did wasn't that bad. If you forgave them, maybe they weren't the villain. But here's the truth: just because you learned how to live with the scar doesn't mean the knife was ever clean. They hurt you, they know it, and they don't know how to carry that knowledge. So they hand it back to you wrapped in smiles and half-hearted apologies, hoping you'll unwrap it and say, it's okay. But it's not okay, and you don't owe them peace for the war they started. You don't owe them comfort for the chaos they caused. If they truly cared, they would have changed then. They would have chosen you then. People don't realize what they had until the silence is permanent, until the door no longer opens, until your energy has been withdrawn like sunlight from a room. That's when guilt begins to whisper, and make no mistake, it sounds a lot like kindness. But kindness takes responsibility. Guilt only seeks permission to forget. They come back not because they're ready to carry the truth, but because they want you to bury it for them. And if you're not careful, you'll take on their shame as if it were your healing. Don't. Let them sit with their choices. Let them feel what it's like to reach out and find that you're no longer reachable. Not out of revenge, but out of wisdom. Some doors stay closed not because of hate, but because of respect for the version of you that finally decided to stop bleeding for people who felt nothing while you drowned. Guilt wears 100 masks, but the eyes never lie. And this time you see clearly. You hear the truth behind the words. You understand the difference between concern and convenience. And now you choose silence, not for them but for you. They finally saw you were the light, not the weakness. They underestimated you. They always did. They mistook your compassion for naivety, your patience for passivity, your forgiveness for weakness. And the day they walked away, or worse, The day they pushed you away, they did so with the arrogance of someone who thought they were discarding something replaceable. But now they see it, not because you shouted, not because you sought revenge, but because the absence of your light made everything around them darker. You see, people don't always recognize value when it's near. Sometimes they only notice when it's gone. They thought your strength was in your ability to give endlessly, to sacrifice, to bend, to carry the weight of the relationship on your shoulders. They didn't realize your real strength was your ability to walk away quietly when you were no longer being respected. And that, right there, shook them, because they thought you'd always stay. They thought no matter how cold they turned, you'd remain the warmth in the room. But when you finally chose yourself, when you finally stopped explaining your worth and started living it, that's when the truth hit them. You were never weak. You were the fire holding everything together. You were the steady hand in their chaos, the quiet voice that soothed storms they never admitted they created. And when that disappeared, they were left with their own noise, loud, chaotic, empty. And now they return, not with love but with need, not with clarity but with regret, because now they know you were the light, and they were just too blind, too proud, too addicted to power to see it. They convinced themselves they were above you, that your softness was foolish, that your loyalty was a burden. But now, surrounded by people who only mirror their own emptiness, they miss the glow that used to surround them when you were near. The safety, the calm, the way you loved without keeping score. They return because they can't recreate what they destroyed, but it's too late, because this version of you doesn't wait for anyone to recognize your worth. You became your own home, your own peace, your own power source, and no one gets to come back just because they finally realized what they lost. Your light hasn't gone out, it's just no longer available to those who try to dim it. You are not a second chance for someone who threw away the first. They saw your light, confused it for a spotlight on them, and only now realize it was always coming from you. And now they have to live in the darkness of their choices. While you rise, glowing brighter than ever, not for them, but for yourself. They don't want redemption, they want access. They didn't come back to make it right. That's the illusion. That's the trick. They're not here with apologies soaked in truth. They're here with tactics soaked in strategy. Because people who once had power over you don't always return with remorse sometimes. They come back because they miss the access. The access to your kindness, your energy, your loyalty, your mind, your warmth. They don't miss you, they miss the version of you that didn't know better. The version of you that gave endlessly, trusted too easily, and asked for nothing in return. They miss the open door, not the person who closed it, and so they return with soft eyes, familiar jokes, half-forgotten memories. They play nostalgia like a piano, hoping you'll hum along to the tune. But this isn't music, it's manipulation. They're not seeking redemption. They're testing the lock. They want to know if the gates to your peace still open with the same old key. But they don't. Not anymore. Because the person they once knew, the one who lowered their voice just to keep the peace, who broke their own boundaries just to feel needed, that person is gone. In their place stands someone who has tasted silence, lived through betrayal, and emerged not bitter, but wise, and with wisdom comes boundaries, doors, locks, peace that's no longer up for negotiation. That's what scares them, not your anger, not your distance, but your clarity. The fact that you now ask the right questions. Why are you here? What do you want from me now? Because when someone truly seeks forgiveness, they don't demand space in your life, they respect your healing from a distance. But when someone seeks access, they'll frame it as love. They'll call it closure, they'll name it fate, anything to get close enough again to control what they no longer own. But this time you see it, you hear the rehearsed sincerity, you feel the familiar pull, and you resist. Because peace taught you something chaos never could. You are not obligated to let someone back in just because they finally knocked. Especially when the same hand they're using to knock is the one that slammed the door in your face the first time. Let them knock. Let them wait. Let them sit with the reality that access is not a right, it's a privilege. One they lost the moment they treated your heart like a revolving door. You are not a backup plan. You are not a refuge for the suddenly awakened. And you are certainly not a second chance for someone who mistook your value until it was gone. They don't want redemption, they want the benefits of proximity. But this time the gate is locked, and the key is healing they'll have to do on their own.